The origins of the American Mafia. I believe the American Mafia was made like this. When America started taking off as a state, it was mostly led by white settlers, Germans, Dutch, and English, right? Humans are greedy. Humans are greedy and greedy. And what the American leadership needed 200 years ago is cheap labor, which is why there was slavery, there was slavery, Chinese slavery, and the massive immigration of poor South Italians and Irish people, and Russians, Russian Mafia, and yeah, a lot of Chinese immigration too. And these immigrants, which you don't see a German Mafia or Dutch Mafia in America, right? These people, some of them realized that they're being used, man. They're being used in factories, they're being used as workers, while the Rockefellers and shit are building all these big wealths and stuff. And some of them didn't want to fucking do it. Some of them were like, fuck this shit, man. Especially the Italians, they already had the culture from Siciliano, you know. Also, the Prohibition was a very important thing there. And these people were looking just for another way to make money, to gain wealth. And that's how I think the first mafia structures have been made in modern-day first world countries, man.
June 30th, 1931. A portly man sits before the defendant's stand in the Chicago federal courthouse, nervously wiping his brow with a white handkerchief. An employee of the Internal Revenue Service rises to the witness stand and begins to drone on about missing tax returns and unreported income.
So you can be the biggest mafia boss in the world. You can kill 10 people, man, but you will always get caught by taxes, dude.
Without context, this scene appears to be about as mundane and boring as can be. However, millions more recognize this court proceeding for what it is, the technicality that allowed the United States justice system to finally catch the most notorious.
Isn't there this amazing video on YouTube where a reporter opens Al Capone's vault and millions of Americans are watching it, and he opens the vault and there's just nothing in it, man.
Mobster of all time. Indeed, to many, the era of the speakeasy, the Tommy gun, and the illicit bootlegger need no introduction. But how did criminals like Al Capone grow so powerful?
It's been a crazy time for them.
Welcome to the latest video in our series on organized crime, where we will explore the origins of the American mobsters and explain how the era of Prohibition allowed them to become some of the most
I thought he only makes one
powerful
videos, but he also makes videos about this stuff. It's pretty cool.
Video, the beginning of a
Yeah, that came this mass immigration, and these people were looking to make money, man. Even in illegal ways.
Poverty,
often in the human race, you see this, that when immigrants come to a country and they have no other choices, they don't really get the options to get legal jobs. They have to become criminal. And you see that in Germany right now. We had a big influx of Arabs in the last decades, and a lot of them, I don't want to blame them. I don't want to be xenophobic here. A lot of these Arabs, Turks and whatever the fuck, Syrians, etc., they often didn't see any other opportunity to make it in Germany other than joining criminal organizations. And someone in chat is saying, nice liberal argument. I only speak the truth all the time. Look, man, I'm not saying here that's cool or good. I still think that the law should fucking persecute these people. But on the other hand, you can't be a dumbass Republican who just walks around life like this, man. These people also have certain issues, man. I want to see you go to a country where everybody fucking hates you, man, and I want to see how you're doing there, man.
And famine rocked their homelands.
Imagine actually looking at worldly issues like an intelligent, logical person, not just, but they're rapists, Fucking, it's not intelligent, man. You're walking around like a fucking Trumpy, dude. Use your fucking head in your life. Don't think that everything is always so simple. It's ridiculous, and you're better than that, man.
Irish, Southern Italians, and Eastern European Jews.
I just said that. Oh yeah, Jews also made a lot of mafia, man. The Jews had a lot of mafia, dude, too.
The iconic
but you can't say that, man, dude. Italians, Irish, yeah, they were mafia, but the Jews, you can't say that. You're gonna get cancelled with Adidas, bro. Can't say that shit.
Station on Ellis Island opened its doors, but as thousands of migrants passed through its crowded lines each day, they soon found that the United States was not quite the dreamland they hoped it to be.
Like I just said, man. I just said that.
Nativist sentiment was strong amongst the upper crust of American society, and many movements sprung up as a result.
Yeah, especially the Irish had so much racism against them,
dude. The
dude.
United States was founded upon the principles of an Anglo-Saxon Protestant society and had no place for the Jews or the Catholics. Consequently, new migrants were often denied respectable jobs, forced to perform menial labor while being crammed into slums.
Look how small
like
New York
the
was back then.
5
Crazy.
Points in New York, where poor families were stuffed into homes built atop landfills amidst tanneries and glue factories. Most immigrants made the most of the hand dealt to them and worked hard to provide for their families. Others turned to more insidious means to make ends meet. The story of organized crime in America begins as early as the 1830s, with the rise of a handful of predominantly Irish gangs in the slums of New York.
Gangs of New York, man, a very good movie about that.
The most gangs was known as the Dead Rabbits, based out of the poverty-stricken
Wait, is the Dead Rabbits also in Gangs of New York, or am I making this up?
They arose as a...
Yeah, oh, that's the guys from the movie, true. I didn't know they actually really existed. Holy shit. Gangs of New York was 100% historical. Fucking hell, dude, I didn't know that.
A defiant movement against class oppression imposed on poor Irishmen. Consequently, their main rival, the Bowery Boys gang, was a xenophobic
That's with Daniel Day-Lewis and the Butcher.
American-born
Bill the Butcher.
Led by Bill the Butcher Poole.
That shit really existed,
the gangs
man.
Fought street battles with
I actually didn't.
knives, hatchets,
I didn't know that.
spiked clubs, brass knuckles, tomahawks, and muskets. And their conflict became an inspiration for Herbert Asbury's 1927 non-fiction book, The Gangs of New York, and its movie adaptation by Martin Scorsese. The most prominent leader of the Dead Rabbits was John Old Smoke Morrissey, a professional boxer who had made his fortune in prize fights.
You never watched Gangs of New York, bro. You gotta fucking do that.
In 1853. Morrissey soon took his violent lifestyle to the streets of 5 Points, having his most bitter rival, Bill Poole, gunned down in a Broadway saloon in a morbid statement against anti-Irish activism. In the following years, Morrissey became the king of New York's gambling scene, owning racetracks and clubs that attracted such prestigious guests as Mark Twain, John D. Rockefeller, and Ulysses S. Grant. Morrissey was soon so influential that with the help of the Democratic Party political organization known as Tammany Hall, he was elected into the United States Congress in 1867, where he always looked out for the Irish, using strong-arm tactics to accomplish his goals. The story of his life left a dubious legacy. Felonious violence was a valid path to wealth for the disenfranchised immigrants.
Dude, I gotta think
Throughout
about
the
that.
1880s and 1890s, new waves of Jewish and Italian migrants would arrive to carve a place for themselves in the streets of New York and beyond. Out of Manhattan's Lower East End, a charismatic thug named Monk Eastman knit together an insidious order made up predominantly of young Jews from Brooklyn. His organization became known as the Eastman Gang, and he became a local kingpin in gambling, prostitution, opium dealing, and violent extortion. Eastman's main rival was Paolo Antonio Vaccarelli, better known by his Americanized name, Paul Kelly. Styling himself as a sophisticated gentleman, Kelly made a name as a dexterous flyweight boxer, riding the fame of his victories in the ring to open up several brothels and
Wait. No, I'm wrong right now. No. For some reason I thought, isn't there a movie where Sean Penn... No, that's wrong. No. There's a movie where Sean Penn is a mafia boss. But that's a modern movie, right? I just saw that movie some months ago. There's a movie where Sean Penn is a mafia boss and a boxer. No, that's him! That's him! The movie! With fucking Josh Brolin.
Clubs, he eventually cobbled to...
Man, you fucking normies all the time, dude, man. Josh Brolin, Sean Penn. There's a movie about this guy. Gangster Squad with fucking Ryan Gosling, dude. They made a movie about this guy. Fuck you. Yeah, it's about... Oh, no, it's in 1949. It's later. And Sean Penn was playing this guy who really existed? Mickey Cohen. Yeah, Mickey Cohen. American gangster boxer. That's why I thought it's him, yeah. Sometimes in my life, maybe you have the same. I'm kind of bored and I just read the Wikipedias of Mafia members, man. They have like the most interesting lives, dude.
Together, the largest and most vicious Italian mob in New York. By 1901, Kelly and Eastman's cronies were locked in a bloody turf war in the Lower East Side. Consequently, the two gangs were also in the pocket of Tammany Hall, who used the violent mobsters to further their political goals in the New York State Legislature through bribery, extortion, and voter fraud. In order to enforce a peace between the two, Tammany Hall organized a boxing match between Kelly and Eastman to determine the fate of their gang war. The two mob bosses beat each other bloody for 2 hours, but the match ended in a draw and the war resumed.
Like
Not all the gangs in New York were started by impoverished laborers. Some had deep ties to well-established secret societies, which had been formed in Italy decades earlier and carried over to the United States by its powerful criminals. Two of these groups were the Camorra and the infamous Cosa Nostra.
Cosa Nostra is Sicily, and Camorra is Cambria, like the south of the Shore, right? When I was studying law, one of my goals in life was, like a bit dreaming, I wanted to become a state lawyer for organized crime. And these guys, these I forgot the name, they actually have a property in my home city in Halle. Like they have restaurants and shit. And there was this case where Camorra, they talked to certain members of the mayor's house in Halle, in my home city, to get contracts to take over restaurants. And the mayor's staff gave the Camorra the go over others, because they were probably bribed, so they can start making restaurants in all of Halle.
Whose rise to power in 19th century Sicily we have covered in a previous video. Meanwhile, Irish gangs held out against the Jewish and Italian advance.
The Irish didn't have it easy.
Morrissey's Dead Rabbit Society had long since been absorbed into the 5 Points gang, but many Irish factions that remained united to form the White Hand gang, named in juxtaposition to the Italians, who practiced a form of extortionism known as Black Hand violence. It should be noted that not all these gangs were divided entirely on ethnic lines. For example, some Jews served under the 5 Points gang, while some Italians worked for the Eastmen. Plenty of Irish, alongside Poles, Slovaks and other marginalized immigrant communities, were present in all gangs.
So interesting,
At the turn of the century, the foundations had been laid for an era of lawlessness in the heart of the United States. But it would be 2 decades later that a certain constitutional amendment would pass, allowing the mobsters of America to explode in prominence and initiating an age of criminal kings who ruled by right of barley, hops and rye. Dating back to the colonial era, America was a nation that loved its liquor. In lieu of access to clean water and unable to afford tea and coffee, the beverage of choice for the average Yankee was a...
Isn't that so interesting that how interesting history is? Because you had no access to tea and coffee, money-wise, you went more into alcohol.
It's cool tankard.
It's so interesting when you look at human history, how everything is built on each other. Everything has a cost somewhere, man. It's
However, it
so
was also a nation founded by Puritans, so its society had civil watchdogs who decried the effects of the alcohol, namely the rise of domestic abuse and substance addiction, and a dive in the physical and mental health of the average working man. In 1873, a group of disgruntled wives who had long suffered at the hands of their drunk husbands formed a society known as the Women's Crusade, whose prayers and songs against excessive drinking rang out throughout the nation.
Illegal to be raped
the anti-alcohol sentiment grew in the following decades, as temperance movements soon evolved into the total prohibition of any and all alcoholic beverages.
If you take a
the
step
leading
back for a second,
organization in this was the Anti-Saloon League, whose relentless lobbying soon had turned most of the United States Congress to their side. By the winter of 1919, the Great War was over, Charlie Chaplin was rising in popularity, and lively jazz clubs rocked America. On paper...
Dude, imagine you're in the golden 20s in New York and you go to a jazz club, right? And you come in and there's jazz. And there's a bunch of men in the corner and they're like... Dude, that must be so style, man. Nowadays you go to a club, everybody's like...
The economy was booming. However, the nation would soon be shaken to its core.
Confirm.
The federal government, under pressure from anti-alcohol abolitionists, passed the...
Clubs have no class anymore. I think about that sometimes. I don't want to sound weird, but I don't really go out much. But, dude, if there was like a nice club where you sit down and you get a schnitzel and a nice cocktail and you listen to some jazz, I would go there. Cocktail bars are the closest to that.
The 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The era of alcoholic prohibition
Democrats or
had
Republicans,
begun,
or who's responsible for that?
as saloons, taverns and distilleries across the nation shut their doors. Puritans from coast to coast celebrated the beginning of a golden age of Christian righteousness and virtues. In reality, by taking drink out of the hands of legal businessmen, they had thrown it into the clutches of the shadowy gangs that had been developing in the country for nearly a century. Throughout the 1920s, almost every major city became a form of criminal organization that supplied its population with alcohol in defiance of the law. Before long, America was full of illicit establishments known as speakeasies. Al Capone is one of the most recognizable names in American history, and his repeated presence in this video should surprise no one. Born in Manhattan in 1899 to a pair of poor Italian immigrants, he dropped out of school at 14 to join Paul Kelly's 5 Points gang, working as a bouncer in one of their saloons. At 18, he was savagely attacked by a knife-wielding patron in a dispute over a woman. The assault left the young gangster with 3 grotesque serrations on the left side of his face, which would give birth to his infamous nickname, Scarface. Yeah. In 1919, he moved to Chicago, where he found work under the mob boss Johnny Torrio.
Weird that, man, I talked about this often. When I was in my 20s, right, I came from a weak neighborhood. I didn't have rich parents and stuff, man. And I think that's just young guys, young boys, man. I always romanticized the mafia and organized crime. I even wanted to kind of join them because I felt like they're so interesting, because you're young, you have nothing going on, you're never going to be a millionaire, right? You're not going to play along with the Elon Musks and stuff. And your parents are not rich and stuff. You have nothing going on, man. And then you watch all these Scorsese movies, The Goodfellas and The Godfather, and you're like, man, these guys are so cool. They go into a club and everybody shuts up. And all these movies and the culture romanticized the mafia for young guys, man, you know? And I felt like this was always very interesting. And then when I was in law school, I wanted to kind of go into organized crime stuff, and I was studying a bit the organized crime in Germany. And dude, you just, when you looked at these cases and stuff and you read books, they're the biggest losers ever, Alter. Fucking assholes, backstabbing each other, stealing, raping, killing, fucking cancer. In my neighborhood in South Halle, the bosses were the Hells Angels, underdogs, motorcycle gang, underdogs. And some of them were always coming into my netto, right? And I was always looking at them. Oh, cool, they have the jacket and stuff. And one of them was always in the store. I always talked to him. We were nice to each other. He was always a bit weird, and he was stealing, I remember. And one day I was like, so how do you join the underdogs? And they're like, well, you know, we don't take any, how do you say? We don't take any papers, man. You kind of have to, you know. And that guy later, it came out, he was the biggest fucking loser. He was stealing all the time. He was looked after by the fucking police and shit. And I just realized, bro, you are such a loser. I kind of looked up to you. Like, you're like the gangster in the hood, bro. He's like, everybody knew he's like a gangster. Don't fuck with him. But when the charade fell, when the curtain fell, you just saw fucking complete cancer toxic human beings, bro, man. And that was important to learn, man, that this romanticized mafia thing, bro, that's why I think what The Sopranos is doing so well. The Sopranos makes you celebrate the mafia. Oh, these guys are so cool. And then you realize, no, these guys are fucking the worst human beings, man.
And handed his criminal empire to Capone, goddamn right, which the young gangster proved to be exceptionally capable at running. By 1927, the portly mob boss was the undisputed king of the Windy City, having made a fortune of hundreds of underground breweries, distilleries, speakeasies, racetracks, and brothels he controlled across the entire greater Chicago area. His main rival was George Bugs Moran and his Irish Northsiders gang. Back east, a new generation of ambitious crime lords had emerged from the old gangs and divided New York amongst themselves.
No, Detroit
Arnold Rothstein's origin story was unlike most mobsters. The son of a businessman of high standing and the younger brother of a rabbi in training, the Jewish youth took a darker path than the rest of his family, delving into the world of gambling and blackmail. It was even alleged that he managed to fix the 1990...
Chet, what do you think, realistically, don't be a memer, if you were in the mafia, what would be your weird nickname? I think I will be Red or Redhead, obviously, something like that. But what would, be honest, man. You guys would probably be Skinny Joe, Skinny Pete, Dumbass McGee, Fuckboy McShorty, Big Dick, El Cosmo, The Wire, The Twink, Longshanks, Big D, Small Dave, 4 Eyes, Smelly Willy, Fat Thomas, fucking moron, bipolar long, Skinny Stick, Fat J, Small Eyes, Poshy, Dumb Downey, Jesus Christ, man. Oy, oy, oy. Silent Jan, Joe Biden. Joe Biden. Oh, fuck me. I gotta order some food in a second.
Baseball World Series between the Chicago Red Sox and Cincinnati Reds by bribing the Red Sox to throw the game. When Prohibition became law, Rothstein turned to illegal alcohol to make his fortune. By 1925, he was one of the most powerful crooks in the country, forging a criminal empire based out of Broadway and becoming the largest bootlegger in the nation. Charles Lucky Luciano was born in 1890.
Do you guys have that thing where you can't log into your fucking PayPal anymore because every time it says, please enter the code of your phone? Do you guys have that shit? Oh, come on.
1997 in Palermo, Sicily.
Lucky Luciano, I heard that before.
As the son of a poor sulfur miner. In 1906, his family emigrated to New York, fell in love with the 5 Points, and came into the employ of a faction of the Cosa Nostra led by the ruthless Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria.
Joe the Boss, man. That's
unlike other Italian-American gangs, the Sicilian Cosa Nostra was staunchly conservative, refusing to work with non-Italians, and even
Yeah, in the Italian Mafia, you cannot be made. Being a wise guy means you have to literally prove that you're of Italian descent. New Mafia group in Halle, be like, welcome to our group. We have Tony Big Dick, Tommy Small Dick, Fat J Jacob, and the worst of us, Joe Biden.
Reluctant to work with non-Sicilian Italians.
They need to be from Sicily, but later they opened that. Later they couldn't get enough new members, so they were like only Italians. But in the beginning, only Sicilians.
Was shocked when his old Sicilian-raised boss referred to his good friend Frank Costello as a dirty Calabrian.
Isn't Frank Costello the Irish guy in The Departed?
Calabria.
Dude, there's so many movies about this stuff.
That was right next to Sicily. And anyway, they were both Americans now. Luciano soon began to dream of a new world order, where Jewish, Irish and Italian gangs alike could breach racial lines and work together and enrich one another in defiance of the government. At the height of Prohibition, mobsters across the country were suddenly making exponentially more money than their predecessors.
Look at that, man. If you stop being racist, you make more money. Kind of makes sense, brother. It's just the truth of life, man.
Before, the gangs had been limited to immigrant neighborhoods in poorer parts of cities, but Prohibition had transformed them into high-flying international businessmen. It now became commonplace for every major crook to hire lawyers, accountants, real estate investors, and shipping contractors.
Makes no sense, pretty much.
By the mid-20s, the most powerful of kingpins were spending the equivalent of 7 million modern US dollars a month on bribes alone.
Jeez.
Still, they remained violent, merciless criminals, using brutal methods to maintain...
I always wondered, man. Here's a weird ethical question, and I think you guys will not be honest to me, and I don't think I will be honest. Imagine your life turned out that you are just a basic policeman. You are a basic policeman. Nothing bad about that, but that's kind of where you got in your life. Now, one day, a man in a suit like this says to you, hey, man, how you doing, man? You know, we gotta do something here later. Maybe you could just go away real quick. I'll give you $500, man. How many people will say yes, man? You know, I often thought about this. Dude, you make no living. Your boss shits on you. The government doesn't care about you. You have a wife and kids home, man. I wonder, man. I think a lot of fucking people take that shit. You don't want to get in trouble with them. They might fucking hurt you. I think a lot of people take that money, dude. That's a very hard question. I think far more than 50% will take it, which is kind of just human. Don't even want to take that. I needed a GPU for Dogtide, though. Yeah, I think, you know. And I feel like that question always scared me. If you ask yourself, people are very corrupt and will easily take money for bad stuff. And I even get that. I understand that. When I was poor, man, I would have taken money for certain things. Like, so I would suck your balls, man. And now imagine this kind of behavior in leadership, right? And it just proves to you, I really believe this. The biggest weakness of the human race in its current state, of our species, is greed. Greed is destroying everything. Corrupt politicians, no progress because of greed, man. And greed is, to me, the biggest enemy of mankind, man. Why is global warming thing right now? Because we're too greedy and we don't want to stop making money from all the fucking global warming
control
shit.
Over their territory. Before long, it became evident that those who lived by the Tommy gun would die by it. Even the most powerful of bosses were far from untouchable. In 1928, Rothstein was gunned down during a meeting at the luxurious Park Central Hotel over an unsettled gambling debt.
Jeez.
In Chicago, the escalating war between Capone and Moran reached its crescendo on St. Valentine's Day of 1929, when 7 Northsiders were openly murdered. This brazen, borderline public execution shocked the American public. Yeah. And although everyone...
I once heard a rumor, I don't know if it's true, that if you become a state lawyer in Germany, they test you if you're corrupt. I don't know if that's true, though. That was like a rumor in law school. Like, if you become a state lawyer, you finally did it, 10 years of studying, and one day, someone's going to stop you and be like, hey, man, you're that new guy working at the office. Is that true? Yeah? I mean, the Germans were like, hey, man, you new guy at the office, right? Shit. And they will see if you like take the money or some shit, man.
Knew the portly Scarface gangster was behind it. No court had enough evidence to convict him. In October of that same year, Luciano was ambushed and forced into a limousine, where he was beaten, stabbed, and strung up by his hands from a wooden beam in a storehouse.
Jesus, man, these guys
Despite all this, he lived, thus earning his moniker, Lucky. All these acts of violence quickly soured public opinion of the police runners who committed them. No longer...
But one thing you learn, man, when you look at real life and law and stuff, dude, there's law, right? And then there's a shadow side. There's a lot of things happening every single day beyond the lawful light of the government. People that abide to law and always listen to the law are more fucked than people that don't do it. If you look at big corporations, if you look at capitalists, right, they break laws so often that they make billions of that shit, man. And we normal guys that always fucking try to do everything correct, man, we just get fucking fucked all the time, dude.
As righteous Robin Hoods, supplying the people with alcohol in defiance of an unjust law. The veil was lifted, and everyone saw the gangsters for what they truly were. Nevertheless, the power of the American mobster continued to grow. In 1931, Luciano murdered his boss, Masseria, and defected to the organization of his biggest rival, fellow Sicilian Salvatore Maranzano. Maranzano consolidated control over all the major Italian crime families in New York, and declared himself capo di tutti capi, boss of all bosses. However, young Luciano was not content with second place, and that same year hired the brutal Irish hitman Vincent Mad Dog Cole to take out his new boss. With Maranzano out of the picture, Luciano became the most powerful mobster in the country, and finally ushered in his new world order, spearheading the formation of the Commission.
If you want to see the downfall of the Mafia, watch a FIFA documentary.
A unification of all of America's major Italian crime families.
And then they made the commission, I know that. There was like a Mafia commission, and if you have big problems, you have to go to the commission and they will fucking have a sit down and argue about
came to be known as the father of organized crime in the United States,
wow,
creating a confederation of Italian-American gangs across New York, Boston, Chicago, and Philadelphia, while also promoting open cooperation with Jewish and, to a lesser extent, Irish outfits as well. Despite moving away from the political conservatism of the old Cosa Nostra, the new American Mafia Confederation created cultural unity by following a strict set of rules that originated in its Sicilian heartland. This included the adoption of Cosa Nostra initiation rituals, hierarchical structure, and the famous policy of Ometta, the Code of Silence.
And then take
in 1931, Al Capone was finally caught.
The problem, the way the Mafia fell, which the Sopranos kind of shows, right, the Mafia fell, right, is that two things happened. The Mafia started selling drugs, which means they had much bigger prison sentences, which means they would much more often flip because they didn't want to go to prison for 20 years. And there was a thing introduced in America called RICO cases. A RICO case would be a case that if you put a crime on a person, and under law, provably, you are connected to that person in organized crime, his sentence or his punishment can go to you too. Meaning the bosses could not be anymore like, I didn't do shit, I didn't do shit. I think if I did that correctly, that's what really fucked the Mafia up.
caught and jailed on charges of tax evasion.
I also feel like that the internet killed the Mafia a lot, because if you want to gamble, you just go to fucking websites nowadays, you know?
However, his arrest was almost inconsequential in the overall struggle against organized crime. By now, the Mafia had tendrils in every level of American society, and Capone was just one drop in an ocean. By the beginning of the 1930s, Prohibition was rapidly losing support in Congress and amongst the media, and it became evident that all it had done was usher in an age of corruption that the law was helpless to combat. In 1933, the 18th Amendment was finally repealed, and alcohol finally became legal once more. However, the criminal empires that Prohibition had enabled continued to grow in the decades that followed, diversifying their focus into illegal gambling, loan sharking, drug trafficking, and puppeteering labor unions. Some of these gangs are still active today, and while Prohibition has been over for nearly a century, it is clear that organized crime in America is here to stay. Our series on the history of criminal syndicates will continue, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button.